Uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Mary Hunter, for excellent presentation. My name is Ismail Said. I'm based in London. I'm a research fellow for Muslim Institute, and I'm a columnist for Bangladesh's daily major English daily, Dhaka Tribune, for London Bureau. Yeah, great presentation. It's a hybrid question, and you can say a statement as well. Two things when it comes to decolonization. So first of all, from the perspectives, you can say from the Indian subcontinent, from the Muslim perspective, and you can include Bangladeshis and Pakistan, and to some extent Indians as well, is that the Muslim rule before the British, say the Mughals, they're not necessarily seen as colonizers, even though in some aspect it may be interpreted, which is totally understandable. But they are seen as more of a integrated and assimilated with the local community, with the concentration of the political power and the capital, as well as employing and giving political agencies to the local people. So in a way, they shifted the metro. There wasn't a separate metropole where they came from. Unlike the British, the metropole was UK. There was a kind of segregation or the political power. So it was mostly, the English or Anglo dominant in the key positions of power, right through, and that trickled down through to the culture. So that's one thing. Second thing is, second part is, so say in early 1900s or 1920s, the Australia, Canada, and South Africa, they managed to get the Dominion status. What stopped? There is a debate, but obviously I want to hear from you. What stopped the Indian Pakistan, or say undivided India, to get the full Dominion status? Even though Dominion status is not fully decolonized, but that's a separate issue. And third part, a common question which is raised by the Indian colleagues, is that the Pakistan, and you can include Bangladesh as well, to an extent, they are more enthusiastic when it comes to decolonization compared to the Indians. Yes, there were Maududis and Islamics, the Islamic movements, which were a byproduct or as a resistance to colonial imposition. So therefore, many say that had the British did not arrive to India, India will continue to be ruled as, say, the Muslim Mughal, or it could have been converted to a local Muslim hybrid Hindu republic, and it will be more secular. But because the colonialism arrived, just like in Egypt in 18th and 19th century, the effect of Napoleon and the British, that you had the Rashid Rada and other Muslim movements in Egypt. So you had the rise of Muslim imposition reaction. So that's why the Indian Pakistan is a bit more slow to decolonization, as remarked by some Indian contemporaries, not all. So that's one thing. And also within that, they make a passive remark that the Muslim League, who asked for, or who really, they were more enthusiastic, the Muslim League, pre-divided India, of gaining and securing a partition as opposed to independence, while Indian Congress, they're more enthusiastic or more concentrated in securing independence as a whole from the British, while the Muslim Leagues were more concerned about not getting full independence from Britain, but more of getting some kind of partition. So these are the three things, three remarks I would like to make. And the last, just a couple of seconds, one Pakistani minister just recently discussed, and it comes to decolonization of education. So that's a separate, and it was started from the Imran Khan's short-lived era. And obviously I would not like to name him, and he's part of my interview as a columnist. And he said that the Pakistan, they want to go through decolonization, so therefore they started to introduce VAT or the thinking of some kind of tax introduction for students in Pakistan studying abroad or trying to take degrees from abroad. So they said that they want to impose a levy or a tax on all arts and humanities, so in order to deter students from going abroad to studying arts and humanities as part of the decolonization process, because when they come back, they come with a colonial mindset. That's their perspective. Save for the exceptions of science and the STEM subjects, that's a different issue. So I'll end it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we've been in touch on LinkedIn for a while, so it's good to finally interact with you. So with your first point in terms of the slightly different approach of Muslim rulers in the region, this is something that I want to look into more in the future. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I've applied to some postdoctoral positions. I'd like to do some research into like an indigenous Islamic liberation theology as an alternative to Zir's Islamization process. And for me, that's going to include quite a lot of historical reading into the way in which the Mughal and other Muslim rulers kind of behaved in the region. So that's an area that I'd like to look into. But I think it's interesting, the points that you raised, especially in terms of the relationship between the metropole and the wider region. Why dominion status was delayed? My understanding is that the British, if you look at what the politicians would say repeatedly, is the reason why they continued there was because India was one of the best things that they had in terms of like economic incentives to be there. The reason why they were in India was because of its benefit that it had financially from exploiting the resources in the region. So I think that was a major motivation. And then also, of course, with the world wars, it then also became a matter of defense, I think, as well, defending its empire and dominions elsewhere. So I think those are two relevant factors. But I think also we have to bear in mind that there was a lot of infighting amongst the Indian nationalists themselves between, say, the Muslim League and the Congress and other movements as well. So I think when I read some of the books detailing the negotiations, it is quite enraging in some ways, the ways that people couldn't agree on things. And I think that certainly delayed probably the achievement of independence in some ways, because they couldn't agree on what it would be post-British. So I think that's a factor as well.
If I may interrupt, apologies. Could it be also the reason that Australia and Canada and South Africa, they seem to be more, from the colonial perspective, more civilized and ready to secure independence as opposed to Indian subcontinent? Is it like partially racism played a role?
I mean, I'm sure, I think my understanding is that actually I do believe that racism was very much, a part of the so-called civilizing mission in the region. And I think that continued until independence and even after independence. So that's probably a factor there, of course. But I do believe that then some of the, at least individuals involved in partition from the British side did actually care about the Indian population. There were perhaps not that many of them, but some of them were, I think, did care. So I think it was probably underlying, but I wouldn't want to say a sweeping generalization that all of them had that view. Why Pakistan's been slower to decolonize? I think part of it is economic, I guess. Pakistan, economically speaking, struggles as compared with India, and I think it's perhaps that strength of having maybe greater economic freedom and thus independence from powers like the British, that it's able to engage in decolonization to a greater extent. I think also, as mentioned, decolonization has to be something that's desired by the government itself. And obviously we've seen that to some degree, as you mentioned, under perhaps Imran Khan, but maybe to lesser extent under other governments. Whereas obviously in terms of the BJP government, it's very clearly a part of the wider narrative as a country that decolonisation is so important, both against dismantling the British legacy, but also the Muslim legacy as well. But at the same time, my experience here is that there is a very big now decolonisation movement within academia, and it's increasingly so, especially within the social sciences. And I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what that produces. But yes, it is an interesting point of comparison, I would say, between Pakistan and India as to why one has been quicker to decolonize than the other. In terms of what you mentioned about Imran Khan and the tax, I hadn't heard about that before, but it's something that I will look into a bit more. Mainly, my research is focused on what the British can do, because obviously I'm conscious that how problematic it is being a white person from the UK talking about decolonisation while sitting in Pakistan. So I'm more interested in the things that I can do, or that other British people can do as allies of decolonisation to help that process. Ultimately, I'm not someone who can decide what decolonisation within Pakistan internally should look like, what knowledge production should be enacted, which languages to prioritise, so on and so forth. So for me, it's looking more into the things that we can do as Brits in order to help the decolonisation process. But thank you for your questions. They were insightful.